Hey everyone, this is Yusuf, and we're Grand Slam guys.
And hey everyone, this is Rahul, the other Grand Slam guy. Today we have a exciting topic for you. So, in light of all the recent events going on in the world, there are not any active tennis tournaments to talk about. So, what we've been doing is we've been reflecting a bit on the past, and specifically 2019. There are a couple of very memorable moments, a couple of very memorable, one in particular
Uh,
memorable. uh, I think
uh,
if I remember correctly, this is I think Yusuf's favorite Grand Slam from 2019. Is that right, Yusuf?
why did you do this to me? I can't honestly, this is gonna be one of the most painful conversations because seeing the effect that this had on the rest of 2019 just pains me so much, honestly.
What had on 2019? What effect of what had on 2019, Yusuf? I don't think I understand what you're talking about.
I hate you so much. All right, well, a little event happened, this little tournament called Wimbledon. Actually,
Heard of that.
So actually, this was a really great event. Actually, fun fact: Rahul actually came to visit me while I was studying abroad in Cambridge, and I still remember the semifinals. Right, we were trying to find a good place to watch it in Cambridge, and we found this really rinky-dinky pub to go to. It was completely empty. We found this TV in the corner. It was the most awkward setup. I thought we were gonna get assassinated sitting there. It was like a dark room. We kept looking over our shoulders, and we
Didn't you
watched our
literally signed up for like a club? Like we couldn't go in without this guy having to like sign his name into something to get a membership for this bar or something.
It was ridiculous. I still have the membership card just so, and it was no fee, which is even weirder. It was like they didn't even need money; they just needed a picture of me and me to write my name. So anyway, there's some random place that has me as a member. So just FBI, this is my alibi. I was trying to watch a tennis match, but we actually watched the first set of the Federer Nadal match, which was
Like,
after the first set was done, we knew who was going to win, so we headed off to some later events. But unfortunately, um, the finals happened, and
what
Federer.
happened in the final?
Well, Federer, Federer should have won.
What?
Are you choking on something there, buddy? But but yes, Federer lost the match. Everyone remembers. Everyone remembers the most memeable moment when the woman's wagging her finger, saying one more point at 8-7, 40-15 with Federer to serve. But today, since Wimbledon's been canceled, I want to set the scene of what could have happened had Federer won that match. Because I think it's very fair to say, and I think you can agree, that this was a match that really, literally could have gone 50-50 either way.
Yeah, this I think this was literally one of the closest Grand Slams in memory. I think before the that one in 2019, the only like the previous Grand Slam where someone had lost having match points was all the way back in like 2004. So definitely the most 50-50 in recent memory.
Yeah, so I think we both thought that it'd be a good place to jump off and see what would have happened had it gone the other way. So let's just get right into it after this intro. So I'm gonna set the scene for you. You're sitting wherever you were sitting during the match, at home, with friends, at a bar, or sports center, whatever. Roger Federer is serving 40-15. You see the camera pan to a woman wagging her hand with saying one. Roger Federer serves, and he serves cross court to Djokovic's forehand, and Djokovic hits his forehand. But instead of him returning it, it hits the top of the tape. It teeters, and it falls back onto his side. Match, set, championship. Roger Federer. Roger Federer falls to the ground. Everyone's cheering. You're cheering if you're a Federer fan. If you're not a Federer fan, you're pissed that somehow Djokovic screwed this up and Federer eked out another Grand Slam. And all of a sudden, Grand Slam number 21, the lead that Federer has on Grand Slams, is extended a bit. And so
Yeah,
now, yeah, so, and what do the rankings look like, Rahul, after Roger Federer just won the match? How do the rankings change?
yeah. So I mean, oddly enough, right? Like at the beginning, right? You don't think it's a big deal, right? So when Djokovic wins, he gets around 12,400 points, and Federer is left with 7,500 points in third place, with Nadal being near 8,000 points. But in the scenario where Federer wins, he actually jumps up to second place instead of Nadal having 8,260 points and Nadal having roughly 8,000 points. And Djokovic still has a healthy lead with 11,600 points. But this healthy lead, you think about it later on in the year, doesn't become as healthy as we think it is right now. So that's where all this sets. So it sets up with, instead of Djokovic having this 5,000 point lead over Federer, it's only about 3,500, and that's where this comes from. So
okay, so yeah, so obviously the next, so let's fast forward now. We're gonna go through the rest of the season. So the next major tournament that happened was the Rogers Cup. So in the Rogers Cup, I think what happened is that Federer withdrew or didn't even play, and Djokovic didn't play. So in terms, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, you're right. So only Nadal amongst the big three. I think other members of the top 10 might have been there, but amongst the big three, only Nadal competed.
Yeah, so looking at the rankings, I can just tell you that the top seeds were Nadal was number 1, Thiem was the 2nd seed, Zverev was the 3rd seed, Tsitsipas was the 4th seed, Nishikori was the 5th seed. And so obviously, since the rankings didn't change the seeding of that tournament, we're going to say that the Rogers Cup kind of ends up the same. So what is after the Rogers Cup, how do the rankings look? Rahul?
Yeah, so after the Rogers Cup, basically, if we're assuming, Nadal would still make it to the final facing Medvedev, beating him in pretty easy fashion. Basically, the Djokovic only loses 90 points for not having participated. Federer keeps points the same because he didn't participate the year before, and Nadal has defended his points, so his points remain the same. And there's a bit of a shakeup in the rest of the top 10 as Thiem overtakes to the 4th spot with 5,000 points. But other than that, and Nishikori, gets some points as well for his performance. But other than that, with Djokovic losing 90 points, there's not too much of a change in the top 10.
So here's where we get really interesting now, is when we look at Cincinnati. Now, originally, the seeds for Cincinnati looked like this. You had Djokovic is number 1, Nadal is number 2, and Federer for number 3, Thiem is 4, and Stefanos is 5. And the key thing to note is that and I'm going to call it the original timeline, which is what actually happened. In the original timeline, Nadal actually withdrew after he had committed to playing the tournament, after the seeds were made. So what happened is that everyone technically moved up, but he had already withdrawn after the draw was made. So in this case, though, what's different is that Djokovic 1, Nadal 2, Federer 3. How does that change things up, Rahul, in our new timeline where Federer is above Nadal?
Yeah, so in the new timeline where we have Federer above Nadal, right, you actually see Nadal giving the lucky loser spot up to someone of the 3rd seed in Djokovic's half of the bracket. But now, instead of Djokovic and Federer being on the same side, Federer gets to the opposite side. And in the 2nd seed, right, in his first matchup, Federer would face Manarino, and then he'd face Goffin, and then he'd face Nishioka, right, which normally Nadal would have faced if he was in the tournament, but he withdrew. And it's safe to say Federer would have, swept by those opponents, making it to the quarterfinals, then making to the semifinals, where he'd face Gasquet and probably straight set that. And then he'd end up in the finals matchup against Medvedev.
So what's really interesting here to note is that in the original timeline, we had Medvedev playing Goffin in the finals, where Medvedev edged out a very close straight set win. Medvedev won, I believe it was 7-6, 6-4 after first set tiebreak. But what's interesting to note is that now it's Federer versus Medvedev. And Federer, I have to admit, he totally gets a cakewalk draw with this. I mean, obviously, like Rahul said, in the semis, he has a great head-to-head against Gasquet. But his head-to-head against Medvedev is equally as good. In fact, I'm going to look it up right now. I've forgotten exactly what the numbers on the head-to-head is, but essentially, Federer has, I think, a perfect head-to-head, if I remember. Yeah, a perfect head-to-head.
He's a 3-0 head-to-head Medvedev, and amongst those 3 matches, Federer has only dropped 1 set, which I believe was in the first match. So
yeah. And more importantly, all 3 were on hard court. So this isn't like we're extrapolating, surfaces. We had, and this was recent. So Federer beat him in Shanghai in 2018, beat him in Basel in 2018. Then he beat him on Miami, which is actually a slower court, which probably wouldn't even favor Federer, but he beat him 6-4, 6-2. So I
Yes.
think we both agree here that it's fair to say that Federer actually would win Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I think the only hitch in this is that like all the matchups with Medvedev he had was prior to March 2019, which you could say is kind of like Medvedev like flipped the switch for his game and he started coming on. But we do have to take into account the fact that Federer probably is one of his best masters, if not best master, is Cincinnati, where I think he's won 7 Masters titles, maybe 8. I don't know. He's won a lot.
Yeah, one of his best
So
surfaces as well. Yeah.
so maybe I could see him dropping a set. Even then, I think like if Federer gets that kind of bracket right, I forget what. I think the original timeline, Federer loses in like a hard match against Rublev in the 3rd round. But
Yes, it's
again,
yep.
to the final against Medvedev, he doesn't face anyone of particular note, top 10 wise, and so he would have been pretty well rested against Medvedev. And so I think Federer's best in Cincinnati would come out in the final, and yeah, he'd walk through.
And just one last thing before we move to the next tournament is that Rublev also, that was the first time Federer played Rublev. So that's kind of also an interesting matchup scenario where Federer lost to someone the first time he's played. Hard to game plan against him. But again, we look at the people that Federer, ends up playing, in the second seed spot. I mean, he's obviously played people like Gasquet a lot before. I mean, Goffin, like all these people that he would have played are people that he is very comfortable playing against. And I think it's safe to say that there's a less likely chance of upset, which is why we both agree on our Cincinnati results.
Yes. And I think the one thing to take of note from this overall is that in the rankings, it doesn't shake up the positioning too much because now Medvedev wouldn't have gained as many points since he doesn't win the tournament. He only gains around, I think, 300 points. But Federer, right, even though he stays a second seed, he gains, I think, 910 points because he did much better in his.
Right, he didn't 2018, yeah.
So now that gap between Djokovic is down to roughly 1,500 because Djokovic has lost points from his performance not being as well in this tournament.
And what's also important to note, and we're going to move to the U.S. Open now. So looking at the U.S. Open rankings and the seeding, I want to say that now Djokovic is number 1, but the key change is that Federer is now the 2nd seed instead of Nadal. So Federer's the 2nd seed, Nadal is now the 3rd seed, and the rest of the seeds stay the same. So now this really changes the different paths that each player takes up into the later rounds of the tournament.
Yeah. No, it like just switching that, it changes almost everything because now Federer having that better seed, he takes Nadal's spot with facing Millman in the first round. And then the Kokkinakis ends up being a walkthrough. So
this is something I want to emphasize for later is that Kokkinakis dropped out before he played Nadal. So that means Federer wouldn't have to play this match. And if we remember when he played prior, when he in the original timeline, Federer had a couple of longer early matches. So instead, he's withdrawn. He didn't have to play this match. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, you're right. And then then he faces Chung, who was a really good player, but now he's coming off injury and he's working his way back up. So probably straight set it there. Then he faces Cilic, right, who is, veteran player. But the thing is, Federer's, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe Federer has a pretty good head-to-head with Cilic, despite Cilic having played him close. And that
I believe he's lost 1 match, actually. If I remember correctly, it's 14-1, but I'm checking it now. It's 9-1. But okay. Yeah, so Federer has a very, very extremely high head-to-head, so you're totally on the nose there. So I think it's fair to say Federer wins that, probably like Nadal, probably in 4 sets.
Yeah, and then after that, it's Diego and the Schwartzman in the quarterfinals, and in the U.S. Open, I'll take it to Fed. And yeah, Yusuf, you want to go over Nadal's side of the situation now that he's flipped with Fed?
Okay, yeah. So again, we've set up the bottom half of the draw, which we have Federer in the semis, playing Berrettini. And then now looking at Nadal's side, we have to now consider that Nadal is now number 3. So if we go to where Federer was originally and we put Nadal there, sorry, I lost my spot. Yeah. So what happens is that, again, the beginning people in the beginning part of the section of the draw, again, these are people that Federer struggled with. I think that, not struggled with, Federer won his first 2 matches in 4 sets. I personally think, based on Nadal's performance, that Federer played Nadal and then Zoom here in the first 2 matches where he got kind of stuck and played some rough 4-setters. I think Nadal started off the tournament really strong. And to be quite frank, I think Nadal was the better player early on in this tournament by far. So I think Nadal definitely takes these in straight sets. He plays then Daniel Evans in the third round. I think he takes that as well. David Goffin. I mean, again, these are matchups that Nadal I totally see him winning. Now, what's really interesting is that in the quarters, he plays Dimitrov, right? So now we already have a kind of a switch now, where Dimitrov was supposed to go to the semis. But now, Nadal versus Dimitrov, Nadal plays Dimitrov pretty well. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the backhand, Federer's backhand is much better than Dimitrov's at this point in their careers. And, Dimitrov originally eked by Federer in 5 sets when Federer got injured. But now I see Nadal taking this and ending up in the semis. Now.
Okay. Well, I guess so. In my side, right? In one of the key, like based on the seedings, right? Medvedev would actually end up playing Dimitrov in that 4th round.
Oh, sorry. No, you're correct. No, you're correct. I apologize. So mistake. Yeah.
Me, right? I actually had, because of how well Medvedev was doing in that tournament, I had Medvedev edging out. Like, I think it'd go 4 sets just because Dimitrov was on a run there, even though he ended up facing a more injured Federer. But I had Medvedev edging out Dimitrov over there. So that would actually set up, for me, I had it setting up a quarterfinal matchup.
No, you're correct on that. I made a mistake. I forgot about that seeding change. You're correct. I remember we discussed this, yeah.
Yeah, so now what was last year's U.S. Open 5-set thriller happens. I don't know if it goes 5 sets again, but I definitely don't think it's an easy match, and it happens in the quarterfinals. And then on the other side of the first half, we got Wawrinka, who like now doesn't have to play Medvedev.
Exactly.
So safe to say he makes it. He would have already beaten Djokovic at this point. Safe to say he makes it now to the semifinals with Nadal. So now we got one side Nadal, Wawrinka, another side Berrettini.
Yep.
What do you think happens from there, Yusuf?
So I think we both agree that Federer, Berrettini, we both take Federer to go to the finals here, which I think is a fair statement. Now, this is kind of where we have this is where now we have a bit of a divergence in opinion, because this was up to the point where we agreed and we were totally on board with each other. Now, I think that actually there's a very good chance that Stan Wawrinka takes this match because it's the U.S. Open. We know Stan can play Nadal really, really hard, especially on a U.S. hard court. He's already beaten people before. And if you remember watching this tournament, Stan Wawrinka was looking amazing during this tournament. I remember it very clearly, but I remember it was very odd when I was watching the quarterfinals that Stan was hot, and then someone who was even hotter than him took him out in that match. But I fully think that in the semifinals, it goes to 5 sets. Now, who do I take winning this match? This is a really, really tough choice for me because I really think Nadal played this tournament really well. And against my personal, belief of how good Wawrinka can be, I actually do think, suppressing the fanboy in me, that Nadal takes this in the 5th set. Very, very tight match. And Nadal, it's like a 5-hour marathon where Nadal gets every single ball and he ekes into the finals. And I have Federer Nadal in the finals. How about yourself?
So, I mean, agreed with Federer beating Berrettini. I think, Berrettini's playing really well to this point, but he's not there yet. Straight set Federer onto the final, as Nadal did in the actual timeline. Now, in this Nadal-Wawrinka matchup, I think I pretty much agree with you that this is a hard-fought match that I would say is like one of those 4.5-hour matches. These guys both play from the baseline, but like Wawrinka's got his, really sharp one-handed backhand. Nadal would be playing with his really good forehand, and like these guys ain't going up to the net anytime soon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be one of those matches that grind out. But I think Nadal grinds that out in 4 sets, taking
4 sets. Oof.
And the only reason is that I think 2 tiebreakers end up happening, and Nadal ends up turning it on both the tiebreakers. And the other 2 sets, I give one break to Wawrinka and then one over the other one to Nadal. It's one of those back and forth. I could see it going 5 sets.
I could see that's like one of those matches where it's like 7-6, 6-7, 6-4, 6, or something like that.
Yeah.
2 tie breaks and the other sets are set by a single break.
It sounds like we're agreed that it'd be for the first time
ever.
Federer had won Wimbledon for the first time ever. in tennis history, we have the Federer Nadal U.S. Open final matchup that I think every Federer slash Nadal fanboy has been praying for, dreaming for.
Well, I honestly think it's really interesting because to set up kind of like the history, or not the history, the significance of a Federal U.S. Open is that in all their years of playing, they've played in almost every final that you can think of every major tournament except for the U.S. Open. Nadal and Federer, they've played in the Australian Open. They've traded blows there. We all agree that fine, Nadal is the king of clay. No one can take Federer. It'd be almost impossible to take him at Roland Garros. I still think he should have won in 2011. He was up 5-2 in the first set. He had the momentum. He beat Djokovic. I'm still upset about that match, but whatever. Wow. That match is over. Nadal. I think we can agree that Federer's obviously the king of Wimbledon. Nadal got one match in 2008. Fine, but
this. And back to your clay court point about Nadal, having dominated the French Open and clay courts in general. It almost begs the question. If we just take Nadal and we erase him, would Federer be racking up all these titles, and would he just not even be the clay court king? Would he just be like the universe? Like, imagine if Nadal doesn't exist. Yeah. Anyways, that's a conversation for another day.
That's a conversation for a different video, but just keep a little tease for the viewers.
Tease it.
But anyways, obviously very significant first Federal final. Now, this is definitely where, we're going to have a bit of a difference in opinion, because I will admittedly admit that I'm a Federer supporter and my friend Rahul is a Nadal supporter. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see this match going? What are the dynamics of the match?
I always keep it objective. I always keep it 100%, 100% real, right? I see this final, right? I see it going Nadal starting on fire, because And the way I see it actually is Nadal starts on fire, and I think he keeps it on fire because remember, in the actual timeline, right? Federer loses to Dimitrov, but he doesn't lose to Dimitrov because Dimitrov ends up outplaying him on the day, but he ends up losing because he's hampered with his back injury, right? I think even though Federer has a relatively easier path to the final than Nadal to this point, he's still in the final. He's played countless hours on hard courts, which are a bit more taxing, than a clay court or whatnot, and it's gonna end up eating into him. And in the first two sets, I'd say similar to the Wimbledon, they might split the first two sets, but I think in the third set onward is what Federer starts feeling it. And I think in the third set you'll see a close one, kind of like a 5-5, but then Nadal gets that break there and he wins that set 7-5. And I think in the fourth set, Federer's one of those guys where I really respect, because very rarely do you see him withdraw in the middle of a match. So even if he's injured in the match, he'll play it through. So I think after the third set, he's feeling it. His back's feeling it. He's feeling it. He's injured, but he wants to finish this final, savor it, try to win the next two sets. And I don't think it happens. I think 6-2, 6-1 in the fourth set. Nadal wins the U.S. Open, and maybe it's a closer match if Federer is at 100%, but I don't think he's at 100% for this final. And that's why I have Nadal running through him in the last two sets especially.
So let me get rid of this fairy tale here. We're already talking about an alternate timeline, but there's something about Federer winning Wimbledon by 1 point, setting up a new timeline. There's also just making up stuff. So let's get a bit more into the facts here, right? So I agree with you. Actually, to be fair, okay, jokes aside, you actually do make a good point on Federer's injury, and I want to address that. So Federer definitely suffered a back injury in his match against Dimitrov, and I think that if obviously Federer hadn't gotten injured, I think we both agree Federer would have gone further in the tournament, right? Agreed.
Probably. Yeah.
So I think something really important to note, and that's why I emphasized this earlier, is that if Federer is the 2 seed, in his path, he's playing Millman, who he's played before. Then in the second round, he gets.
You don't want to. I'm just having to interrupt you real quick. You don't want to make that point because he's played him before, but he's also lost him before.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He has, but he's gone over that hump. That was gone over that hump. But what I'm saying is, in the second round, Konakis withdraws. That's a whole 2 hours that Federer gets relief in. Because remember, in the first 2 matches, he goes to 4 sets. He takes a bit of time. I think without that long match early on, I think it lets Federer rest up and prevents the injury from happening, in my opinion. I'm assuming that Federer doesn't get injured during this because his draw is a bit easier than it was last time. Now, more importantly, though, in the finals, I actually want to bring up, because this is the first time they've played at the U.S. Open, but they have not played, but they obviously have played, before. So let's kind of run through the previous matches. Remember, I just told you of we watched the Wimbledon match. Federer beat Nadal in 4. So that was the most recent match. And then before that, I'll admit, Nadal dumpstered Federer in the semifinals of Roland Garros. That was expected. I was like, you know what? I don't even care. I'm just happy he showed up. Happy, got a good sweat going. Toweled him up, I'm glad he got a couple balls in, I was just happy about that. But really importantly, though, so that was on grass and that was on clay. Now, if you look at every other match they've played, 2019 Indian Wells, Nadal withdrew, so they couldn't play. But then after that, you have Shanghai, where Federer won in straight sets, Miami, where Federer won in straight sets, Indian Wells, Federer won in straight sets, Australian Open, Federer won in 5 sets. In 5 sets, sorry. Then you have Basel, which Federer won in straight sets, and in 3 sets, sorry. The last time Nadal was beaten Federer on a hard court was in 2014 at the Australian Open. So you have to consider that the U.S. Open is a much faster court. Federer has beaten Nadal on hard courts very recently. I think Federer matches up with Nadal very well as of recently with the new backhand. I think it's a pretty even matchup now. I think it's a very fair statement. So the way I see this happening, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying those are all like really good points, and I'd agree, right? The only difference is that a lot of those wins, right, they happened in 2017, but fair. I think the difference between 2017 and 2019, which you would agree, right? Nadal started racking up even prior to the U.S. Open, racking up even in our alternate timeline, racked up that Rogers Cup win, starting to do well. And I think I don't know if he withdrew or not, but I think he was set up to do well in Cincinnati. And then even after the U.S. Open in the actual timeline, he's doing much better in 2019 hard courts than he was back in 2017. But I do agree with some of your points.
Well, before I go to the last thing I want to say is he wasn't doing bad in 2017. I mean, the matches he beat Nadal in Shanghai. Nadal was in the finals of Shanghai, which is a very fast course. So Nadal did very well. He beat him in the finals at Miami. So, he was doing well there too. And it was the finals of the Australian Open. So I think, as much of a Federer fanboy as I am, I have to admit that Nadal is, a pretty decent, he's a very great hard court player. And I think even back in 2017, he's still doing well. But I agree, Nadal in the real timeline won the U.S. Open. So Nadal is playing well on hard court, which is why this is a close match. The way I see this happening is that Federer wins the first set. I think Federer wins it similar to Wimbledon, 7-6 in the first set. Nadal takes the second set. And I think for us, in Federer-Nadal matches, I feel like it usually happens where it's always the third set that decides it, right? It's a close third set. Just like in Wimbledon, right? It was like very close. Federer got the break in the third set, and that was it. And I feel like that happens a lot in matches because actually in the 2017 matchup in the Australian Open, it went the same way. They split the first 2 sets, and then it was the third set where Federer dumpstered him 6-1. So it's that third set which is the key decider. So in my opinion, I do think Federer takes. I think Federer takes this third set, and then maybe Nadal gets the fourth, maybe he doesn't, or maybe Federer wins in 4. But I definitely do see Federer beating Nadal at the U.S. Open here.
Okay, and I want to note one thing, right? One thing is actually very interesting about as classic as some of the Federer-Nadal matches have been, right? Especially you talk about that 2008 Wimbledon, or you talk about the most recent Australian Open final one. It's almost like there are not too many huge comebacks in these finals, right? It's like whoever gets that third set, and I don't know the percentage on this, but it must be that whoever gets that third set 90% of the time, they're getting the dub in the final.
Well, actually, let's go through that really quickly. So that happened. So we have that happening at Wimbledon at the Australian Open. Now they then played. Looking back, if you look at the 2012 Australian Open.
Well, there's 2014, but I guess we don't really.
Well, because Nadal won both. I think if someone wins in straight sets, they're going to win straight sets. I agree. But if you look at the 2012 Australian Open, it's the same thing where they split the first 2 sets, and then Nadal won a close third set, and then that was the victory. I think it's really interesting.
I guess if we're only taking into account situations, right, where they split the first 2 sets.
Right, because otherwise it's going to be a win for whoever won the first 2 sets.
Yeah. and then even 2009, right? Nadal takes the dub because they split the first two sets. Nadal wins the tiebreaker in the third set, and then he ends up winning in 5. Yeah, I mean,
It's a very interesting dynamic. So I actually think it's a very fair statement to say that the only difference between our opinion here is who wins the third set. And I think you make a fair point about his back. So I think the real question is, does Federer have enough in the tank to make it through the third set and win the third set? So I think that's really the key difference here. But now that we've talked about the U.S. Open enough, let's talk about what the rankings look like post U.S. Open. So
okay.
Rahul, what's your rankings look like with Nadal winning but Federer going to the finals?
So in my opinion, right, if Nadal ends up winning this U.S. Open, what ends up happening is that Federer still retains his number 1 spot, right? Because he would have gained a lot of rankings points from.
Or he becomes world number 1.
Yeah. I guess yes, you're right. Becomes number 1 because he's originally number 2, and he didn't have many points to defend from last year's U.S. Open, and having gone to the final this time, he vaults to number 1 in part because Djokovic loses 1,800 ranking points because he loses in that 4th round matchup to Wawrinka. So that actually puts Djokovic, for me, in 3rd place, right below, I think about 200 points below Nadal, who gains a lot of points having won the U.S. Open this year. So Federer first, Nadal second, Djokovic third, and then in the rest of the top 10, I have Zverev, I believe. No, Zverev gains some points. TM gains some points. I think the rest of the top 10, they like gain some points and they have a few switches here and there. But the big thing to note is that Medvedev doesn't, like, having made the final in the actual timeline, only gains about 300 points in my timeline because now he's lost to Nadal in that quarterfinal. Is that what we had? Yes, quarterfinal matchup. So he actually doesn't gain as many points as he would have. And I think that's it for me. What about you?
I think, again, our situations are pretty similar with the exception of this finals matchup. So I have Federer, but in mine, I have Federer being the clear world number 1 with about 11,190 points. Djokovic is still number 2 because Nadal doesn't gain as many points. So Djokovic is number 2 with around 9,000 points. Then Nadal's number 3 with 8,400 points, roughly. And then, the rest of the top 10 go down very similar years where I have TM is 4, Zverev is 5, Stefanos is 6, Kashnikov is 7, and obviously Medvedev, who doesn't get that big boost because he loses earlier on, like we discussed, is 8 instead, and then I have Nishikori and Agut down, rounding up the top 10.
Yeah. Agreed. And so now I think we've seen, right, where like just Federer having flipped the switch in Wimbledon, turning it on in those 2 match points, right? Having like switch seeds with Nadal in a lot of these tournaments, just that switch seed, nothing else. Even in both of our situations, right, we disagree on what happens in this final, right? He's now world number 1 instead of a very distant world number 3 to Djokovic. So for all the Federer fans out there, man, like that, it like
Dude, life isn't fair. Life isn't fair. This is.
It's like
this is some bullshit.
Like, when I was like thinking about this, like, I mean, I think you'll agree, dude. It was like crazy. Like, I was shocked at this point, like how crazy the U.S. Open could have been. Like, I'm almost like, so in that final, right? Again, like as Yusuf was saying, I was visiting him in Cambridge. I could safely say I was rooting for Djokovic, right? Because I'm like, don't get 21, don't get 21.
Right.
But having gone through this situation, man, like, man, what if he had done this? We could have had the Federer.
We could have had the match, and that would have been such an amazing final because I think we both agree it would have been close.
I'll give Federer 21 to get to see that U.S. Open final, man. I'll give it any day.
Dude, all I'm gonna say is, Federer, why do you serve to the forehand? He had 40-15. He did the same thing in the U.S. Open. He did the same thing here. He could have just gone down the line, hit an ace. He could have done anything. Anyway, I think this video is painful enough for already.
I think it's a good time to move on to the rest of the Asian hardcourt swing. So I think after the U.S. Open, right? I think there's like not a significant break, but I think there is. I think it's like a month-long break before any of the top 10 really
Mm-hmm.
start playing. I believe now we get to now we're not including Laver Cup or anything like that, but we get to the end of September, where both the China Open and Japan Open are simultaneously happening with different members of the top 10 in both of them. So yeah, Yusuf, you want to start off with the China Open and just talk about how you
Sure.
have it going down?
So just talking about the China Open, let's look at the seeds in the, what I like to say, the original timeline. We had the number 1 seed was TM, number 2 is Zverev, and number 3 is Tsitsipas, 4 is Kashnikov, and 5 was Agut. Looking at actually both of our rankings, what we just said before, that doesn't really change. So in the China Open, the seeds don't change for the top 10. And so we basically have the China Open playing out the exact same ways it happened in real life. We have TM beating Stefanos in the finals. So we adjust those points as we said, but again, it was not really a big change. Looking at the Japan Open, just to quickly get through it, because again, looking at the top 10 seeds there, the only top 10 player who played was Djokovic. And Djokovic was the champion when he beat Millman in the finals. It was like 6-3, 6-2, or 6-2,
Yes.
something like that. It was a very easy, like, straight setter, if I remember correctly. So that's why, again, we just have Djokovic picking up those points. But again, no real change. But again, the real interesting thing comes now that when we move to Shanghai, which, Rahul, can you kind of preview what Shanghai looks like before we get into the draw and what changes?
Yeah. So now we've done both China and Japan, right? And now where we're at in the ranking points that I have, right, is that we saw Federer number 1, but now that Djokovic has taken those ranking points from winning Japan, he's vaulted 500 points clear of Nadal to number 2,
Mm-hmm.
and Nadal's number 3, and then TM, who's won China, has gotten a bit more distance at number 4, about 6,000, and then we got the rest of the top 10 kind of round out similarly with Zverev, Tsitsipas, Medvedev, Kachanov, and so on. That's where we are at the start. And Yusuf, I think we had differing points, right? But I think the seeding, did we have similar for the?
So the seeding for us was actually the same in this case. So since again, I agree with you. The only difference is my points, right? So I have Federer as almost a clear world number 1 with around 11,000, Djokovic with 9,500, Nadal at 3. But then again, I have TM at 4, Zverev at 5, Stefanos at 6, Kashnikov at 7, and really important to note is that Medvedev is at 8. So remember, because we have him losing earlier in the quarters in the U.S. Open, because that finals matchup ends up happening a lot earlier. So that's very important to keep in mind, because that kind of changes where he ends up in the draw of Shanghai.
Yes. And so now, like, just going into Shanghai, right? This ends up again being a very important tournament. We're keep reminiscing on this because pretty much everyone in the top 10, I don't know if Nishikori is a factor at this point, but it's pretty much everyone in the top 10 ends up playing it out. But how it plays out is very different, because now the seedings are all mixed up slightly. So let's just go, Yusuf, you want to start off with the top
of course.
half?
So again, I just want to remind you with the seedings where we have Federer 1, Djokovic 2. And important to note is that in Shanghai, that's when Nadal withdraws. So Nadal is not in this tournament. So what we have now is our seedings is Federer's 1, Djokovic is 2, but TM moves up to 3 and Zverev moves up to 4. And originally, Medvedev was 3 and TM was 4, but now that's completely messed up now. So looking at how the draw lands up, let's look at the number 1 seed. So the number 1 seed in this case is Roger Federer. So if we look at where Djokovic was originally, Djokovic in the top section of the half plays Shapovalov in the second round because he gets a bye, plays Isner, which again doesn't change because those rankings haven't changed. But then in the quarterfinals, he plays the 6th seed. So originally the 6th seed, which Federer would have originally played Stefanos. But now in the quarterfinals, Federer, who's the number 1 seed, is going to play the 6th seed. And the 6th seed in this case is Kashnikov. So I have Federer. Now that is where Djokovic lost. Djokovic lost to Stefanos in the quarterfinals. But since he's playing Kashnikov, he wins that match. So Federer now ends up being the semifinalist at the top part of the draw. Now looking at the rest of it, Basically, I don't want to run through everything. I'll just tell you where people end up. Essentially, I have Zverev playing Berrettini in the quarterfinals, and Zverev beats Berrettini in the quarterfinals. I have Stefanos. Funnily enough, Stefanos actually still ends up playing Djokovic in the quarterfinals based on the seeding. But basically, he beats Djokovic because it's the same match. And I have Medvedev playing TM, and I have Medvedev winning that match. So my semifinals matchup is Medvedev versus Federer and Stefanos versus Zverev. And now I think this is kind of an interesting matchup. And I'll just finish my Shanghai and before I let you get into it so I don't confuse people.
Sure.
So Medvedev versus Federer. Now, again, I want to remind you guys that this is a matchup that I think Federer is really favored in based on the head-to-head and what we talked about earlier. And to stay consistent, I'm going to give this match to Federer. So you can already imagine that Medvedev goes from being, he wins this tournament to now he loses in the semis. So Medvedev is really getting shafted by this change in seeding because he's playing opponents that he has a worse head-to-head to, as one would expect. So I have Federer in the finals. And then I have Stefanos versus Zverev. And in this head-to-head, I think Stefanos leads the head-to-head, if I remember correctly. Actually, just to be no, I'm pretty sure he leads. I'll check in a second while you talk about yours. But I have basically my – sorry, yeah?
No, I was going to say, now, I guess, a lot of what we have similar, right, is getting to that quarterfinal, semifinal spot. But actually, the way I have it turning out seems to be, completely different, right? So let me roll it back a bit. So now that Federer's taken the number 1 spot, right, and Tsitsipas is no longer at the number 6 spot, I have actually Tsitsipas beat Hubert God, I don't know what his name is. He ends up beating him in a third set tiebreaker. I actually have that guy, Harksaxis, now winning the third round match and facing Federer in the quarterfinal.
Wow.
Now I still have Federer beating him, but he was on a roll. We haven't talked about next gen much in this video, so I just gotta toss it a bit to next gen, giving Federer a bit of a run for his money. Federer still ends up winning it, and I'll give it a straight set. But I think that there's a tie break that happens in there. I just had to shout out the next gen. Now, funnily enough, right, we had Djokovic and Tsitsipas play in the top of this bracket in the original timeline. Based on how the seedings have happened, right, Djokovic is now as a 2nd seed, right? But now I have Tsitsipas as that 5th seed. So actually, they still end up having that quarterfinal matchup, except now it's in the bottom of the bracket, and I have Tsitsipas still beating him. And now I actually have – now this is where things get interesting, right? I have Medvedev as replacing the 7th seed, right?
Right.
And originally, right, the 7th seed was Kachanov, and Fognini beats Kachanov in that third round. But Medvedev, you got to remember, right, he would have lost earlier in the U.S. Open, but this is when 6 straight ATP finals happened in the ATP Tour for Medvedev. Hasn't happened in this timeline, but this is when, he's turning it on. I think in a hard court, Fognini ain't no problem for him. He beats him easily. Now Medvedev plays who would have been the 3rd seed. The 3rd seed is actually Thiem. And, Thiem has gotten better at hard courts, but Medvedev's still turning it on. I think Medvedev rolls through Thiem, right? And actually, with different matchups, right, I still agree with you where we get to this Medvedev semifinal matchup and then Zverev-Tsitsipas semifinal matchup on the other side. Now, I want to let you finish about what you had in the semifinal and final matchup, and then I'll get to mine.
So again, we get to the same place essentially in the semis where we have Federer versus Medvedev and at the top half and Zverev versus Stefanos in the bottom half. And I have, like I was saying, Federer beating Medvedev, and I have Stefanos beating Zverev. And that's because Stefanos has about a 5-1 or 6-1 head-to-head against Zverev. So I think it's fair to say that the most likely outcome is that he wins this match. Okay, well, obviously I think we have a bit of a differing opinion. So my finals ends up being Federer versus Tsitsipas. You can tell I can't pronounce his name, and I fully admit that, and I will continue to mispronounce it. So who do you have in your finals? I have Federer versus Stefanos.
And I just want to say as a shout-out, right, as a couple of brown guys and having our names mispronounced for 20 years, I think we have the right to mispronounce 1 or 2 European names here and there. So don't come at us.
Tsitsipas. Sipidipidipis. Big Dipper.
Anyways, I have Federer and Medvedev in that first semifinal matchup, right? But I have Medvedev taking this one because you got and he wins Shanghai in this original timeline, and he doesn't win it for no reason, right? In this original timeline, he's beaten Tsitsipas, he's beaten Zverev, he's gone through some people in this original timeline, and I think Federer, while he's on a roll, like I think that he doesn't have quite enough in the tank, and I think like maybe if this is a 5-set hardcore match, maybe I would have given it to Federer. But in a 3-set hardcore match, I don't think Federer turns it on quick enough, and I think Medvedev gets that dub to the final.
Even despite the fact that in basically both of our scenarios, even though they're a bit different, we have Medvedev essentially not really winning as much. I mean, Medvedev doesn't make the finals of the U.S. Open. He doesn't win Cincinnati. He still makes the final of the Rogers Cups, but he's not as good. Do you still think that he turns it on in your timeline?
Maybe there's something that's said to be like something set to be about like him not getting those results and then not getting that like kind of momentum going, right? Because he doesn't have that momentum in this timeline. But I think that whichever timeline you think about it, Medvedev was gonna pop at one point. And I think now, instead of him having popped in the US Open, I think that happens in Shanghai here. And I think that's the difference, right? Because you gotta remember it's a long tour. Federer, the big three, all these guys, they're not playing their 100% each match. And I think it's one of those matches where Medvedev turns it up a bit and Federer just doesn't have that motivation to match that level right now. And that's how I see it playing out. And then in this Zverev matchup, right? Let's go back to the original timeline. Remember, Zverev is running, like, he's had a very inconsistent 2019. But in Shanghai, this boy beat Federer. He's beaten Berrettini, really good on hard courts at this point. He's playing, I mean, not really a close matchup against Medvedev in the final in the original timeline, but my point is that Tsitsipas is playing really well, but I don't think, despite their head-to-head, I think on the hard court, Zverev gets the win here. And that's mainly because, like, Zverev is inconsistent, and we've seen, like, in 2019, anything from, like, to 20 double faults on his serve and, like, 15 double faults on his serve in a 3-set match. Don't know how that happens as a professional, but I think Shanghai was at one moment in this 2019 where we're like, oh, that's the guy who was the next-gen star in 2018. And I think that happens here, and I think he makes it to the final against Medvedev, but then I see the results happening very similar, where Medvedev just rolls through him in the final.
So in my finals matchup, I have the complete opposite people playing. I have Federer versus Stefanos in the finals, and I am, not as much of a fanboy. I won't give this one to Federer because I don't think he would win this. I actually give this one to Stefanos. So I have Tsitsipas winning the finals of Shanghai here, which is, again, completely different result. So how do your rankings look post Shanghai? And then I'll tell you what my rankings look like post Shanghai.
Yeah. So post Shanghai, Federer still up number one, but now what's happened is that Djokovic, having lost earlier on in the tournament, is dropped to number 3, only about 250 points behind Nadal, who's the number 2 now. TM's gained some points. Medvedev, having won the Shanghai, has vaulted to the number 5th spot with nearly 5,000 ranking points. Zverev, with a really good result, is now the 6th seed, and then Stefanos, and then there's a big drop-off to where Nishikori, Kachanov, and Agut round out the top 10. So I imagine yours will be what were you going to say?
So, yeah, sorry, I cut you off, but what I meant to say is that for me, again, I have a similar but different because we have different results earlier on. Obviously, a big one being I think Federer takes the U.S. Open. I now have Federer as still at world number 1 with now with a large lead at 11,400 points. I have Djokovic with about 8,700 points, and I have Nadal just a hair behind at 8,400. And then rounding out the top 10, I have TM with around 6,400. I have Zverev. I have Stefanos behind him. Then I have Zverev, and then I have Kachanov, Medvedev, Nishikori, and Agut. So again, very similar, but I don't have Medvedev gaining as many points. I think in mine, I have Medvedev as 1, 2, 3, 4.
Actually, our rankings are very similar, but the big difference is that like that Medvedev factor, we're like, it seems to be that where we disagree a lot in these matchups is how good of a year does Medvedev end up having?
Yeah, because I'm of the opinion that I think you need the players end up on rolls, and I think Medvedev not making as many big finals and big matches, I think that kind of hurts him. But I think you think differently on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, because I think he did end up still making that. He still ends up making that Rogers Cup final, even if he loses it to Nadal. He ends up playing. Wow, he actually really gets rolled by Nadal. Ends up losing to Nadal in the U.S. Open. He Cincinnati. I don't know. Let me go back there. I forget what exactly I ended up seeing in Cincinnati, but he made. I think he had a good result there. It's just not that.
Federer beats Medvedev in the finals of Cincinnati rather than Medvedev winning. That was in both of ours.
So that yeah. So that exactly.
So he still makes
so
the finals of that.
Still having good results. I think that it starts somewhere, and I think Shanghai is where it starts with. That's the thing where it comes down to.
I think that's a really fair point.
Yeah. So I mean, now that we've gone over our Shanghai ratings, you want to go on to the next tournament of the year, Yusuf?
Sure. So there are a couple smaller tournaments, but really there's only 3 tournaments left that really matter in terms of rankings and things. We have the Swiss Indoor, where Roger Federer's background. We have Paris, and we have ATP Finals. So let me just quickly run through the Swiss Indoor Final. So the original seedings for the Swiss Indoor were Federer as the first seed, Zverev as the second, Stefanos as the third, Agut as the fourth. And despite our slightly changed rankings, that doesn't really change that much. So again, we don't have much of a change happening here. So we have basically the same results happening where Federer wins. And again, not much of a big change because originally we had Zverev loses in the first round, Stefanos loses in the semis, and Agut loses in the quarterfinals. And we have those same results happening here. So again, not much of a change. And then moving forward, why don't you preview Paris for us?
Yeah. So I mean, again, after Swiss indoors, we don't have too much of a change in the rankings. So Paris, right? What happens in the original timeline, right, is we have again pretty much all the top 10 playing. We got Novak at that 1 seed, followed by Nadal, and then Federer, who ends up withdrawing as the 3 seed, right? Now this is where things end up mattering, right? Because now, as Federer takes that 1 seed where Djokovic was at, and then it's followed by Nadal, and then Djokovic. Now I know your timeline differs slightly in the Nadal Djokovic switch, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this ends up mattering as well because we see what happened in the Paris Masters was that a lot of the top 10 ended up making it to the final, or not to the final, but ended up making it. I think a couple of them ended up making it pretty far. So that's where we see that the switch in the matchups end up mattering. And yeah, you want to preview how you have your setup, Yusuf?
So basically for my setup, after Federer withdraws, the way my seeding looks is that I have Djokovic is 1, Djokovic is the 1 seed, Nadal is the 2 seed, TM at 4, Zverev TM at 3, Zverev at 4, and so on and so on. So essentially for me, and I can explain my tournament because it takes like 5 seconds. Basically, it's a really similar setup to what happens in real life. I have Djokovic in the semis beating Stefanos. That's the only big change I have. So instead of Djokovic beating Stefanos in the quarters, which is what originally happens, because of the seeding change, he plays in the semis, he still beats him. And a lot of the other top 10, basically everyone gets upset pretty early in the tournament originally.
Oh,
so
okay, I think I mixed it up there.
So that's why I have Djokovic just beating Shapovalov in the final.
Yeah, so I think I'm very similar, right? The only thing is that now that Nadal has assumed the 1 seed and Djokovic has assumed the 2 seed with the Federer withdrawal, I have actually Nadal. He pretty much cruises to the quarterfinal, right? But this time, where Nadal, I think in the original timeline, he withdrew to Shapovalov in the semifinal. In this quarterfinal match, right? He ends up where I have it matching up with Tsitsipas. And now this is where things get interesting because in the actual timeline, he doesn't have a really top 10 matchup. But now he faces Tsitsipas, and I think with how Tsitsipas has been doing in the year till this point, Nadal, maybe he's hampered a bit by his injury, but even if he's not injured, he's not playing at his best, and I think that Tsitsipas actually beats him in the quarterfinal. So I have him having a slightly worse result in this tournament this year, and Tsitsipas now cruising to the final versus Djokovic, because Djokovic on the other side would have faced Shapo who Nadal withdrew against originally, and then Djokovic beat Chapo, lines up for a Djokovic versus Tsitsipas final, where I think Djokovic, again, like in the original timeline, he plays too good and gets that win.
Fair. I think that's also a fair thing considering how our seedings are a bit different and our world rankings are different right now. I think that's a fair result. But so then basically how my results look like going into the World Tour finals, the way I have things looking is that I have Federer at 10,000, a bit over 10,000 points. I have Nadal at about 8,700 points, Djokovic a little over 8,000. I have TM at 4 with that 5,800. I have Stefanos then at 5,200. Then I have Medvedev 4,100. And then, so on and so on. So not much really changes. And then the people I have qualifying for the ATP finals are Federer at 1, Nadal at 2, Djokovic at 3, Stefanos at 4, TM at 5, Medvedev at 6, Zverev at 7, and Berrettini at 8. So how does yours look?
Yeah, so mine looks very similar, right? The only difference is that now I didn't have Federer winning the U.S. Open, so it's a very close number 1 to Nadal, but still number 1. So our top 4 seeds are the same, right? 1 Federer, 2 Nadal, 3 Djokovic, 4 TM. Some of the ratings points are different, and it's a closer top 3. Now, where I have it different is that I have Medvedev having had a better year. I have Tsitsipas actually still getting that 5th seed because of his performance in Paris. And then Medvedev slightly below the 6th seed. And Zverev getting that 7th seed with the withdrawal of Nishikori, I believe. Or not the withdrawal, but he didn't play. And then Berrettini, with his recent hardcore performance, also getting that 8th seed. So I think it might be the same or one. So
to explain for everyone who's listening, though, the only thing that we have different is that I have Stefanos at 4 and TM at 5, and Rahul has TM at 4 and Stefanos at 5. So that's the only switch. So in terms of our round robin groups, my Andre Agassi group is I have Federer, TM, Stefanos, and Zverev in the first group. And in the Bjorn Borg group, I have Nadal, Djokovic, Medvedev, and Berrettini. What do your round robin groups look like?
Yeah, so my round robin group is the same as we both have Federer, TM, Zverev in A, but now I have Medvedev, not Tsitsipas. And then in B, I still have Nadal, Djokovic, and Berrettini, but now it's Tsitsipas and not Medvedev because, how we flipped it. Now, and now going into Group A, which I personally think is a really one of the most interesting ones, right? I think things play out like really interesting here because you have a lot of great players, but they play well against different players. So I actually have both TM and Zverev going 2-1, but losing against different players, right? I have TM who beats Federer and Zverev, right? And we want to, take a look at. We want to remember in the original ATP finals, right? TM had a really good performance making it to the final. So I still think TM goes on a tear in the ATP finals, and he beats both Fed and Zverev. But I think Medvedev, maybe I'm overcompensating for Medvedev, but I'm still believing that he gets that one dub. And I think against a player like Tsitsipas, who's very like momentum. I don't want to say momentum based because obviously everyone, carries momentum in a match. But Medvedev, who's definitely that more Djokovic style player, just get balls in, keep the rally going until you get your moment. I think someone like Medvedev will make TM, even as good of a form as he is in, very error prone. And that's why I have him losing there. And then similarly, I have Zverev beating Federer and Medvedev because he's on a really big tear, but then losing to TM, who's almost playing in a similar way, but I think he's just playing at a slightly higher level. And the only reason why I have Zverev beating Medvedev is because I don't think Medvedev keeps his level up in all the matches. I just think that he matches up the best with TM out of everyone in his group.
So who do you have in Group B coming out?
Oh yeah, and then in Group B, I have Djokovic and Tsitsipas eventually making it out of it because I have Djokovic beating Nadal, Tsitsipas, and Berrettini, beating everyone in the group. I have Berrettini losing to everyone in the group. So then eventually, I have Group B be much simpler. It boils down to Tsitsipas versus Nadal to clinch that number 2 seed. And then I have Tsitsipas. Again, you got to remember, Tsitsipas is on a big roll this year, and I have him edging Nadal out in 3 sets to clinch that second seed.
So actually, my group A and B work out in the way. So I have, to remind everyone, in my group A, I have Federer, TM, Stefanos, and Zverev. I have TM losing all 3 matches actually, based on yeah, I know a big change, but I have him losing all 3 because I'm really confident in Stefanos and Zverev. So I have this is going to be a bit controversial. I have Stefanos winning all 3 matches, going 3-0. Then I have Zverev losing to Stefanos, obviously, but beating TM and beating Federer.
Wait,
And
so
that means
Federer,
Federer doesn't come out as I don't have Federer coming out. I have Federer losing to Zverev and Stefanos, so being TM. Now, this is based off of, I think a couple of things. I think, last year, the original group that Federer was in, if you look at it, I believe Federer was originally with Djokovic, TM, and Berrettini. Now, originally, Federer beats Djokovic, loses TM, beats Berrettini. Now here, I think Federer actually, still is does decently well, but I just don't think he's more tired. Last year, he didn't have a great performance because he lost in the semis last year, and he's already tired because he's gone much deeper in tournaments. So I have Federer going 1-2, and then I have TM losing all 3. So again, I only have Stefanos and Zverev coming out in Group B on Borg. I have Djokovic and Medvedev coming out. I think that's a pretty fair result because Nadal isn't, as great on these indoor hard courts, and I think Berrettini was kind of the odd man out really here. And I think Medvedev and Djokovic are really the guys to take here. So my semifinal matchups end up being Medvedev versus Zverev and Djokovic versus Stefanos. What are your semifinal matchups?
yeah, and I guess I should have made one thing clear, right? Is with both TM and Zverev winning 2 matches, I also have Federer losing twice in mine. And that's more, also Federer's played a long year. That's just more towards the fact that this is where TM and Zverev both turned it on in our original timeline. I still think that they turned it on. And so that's why I have both, with TM being number 1 seed and Zverev being number 2 seed. I have my first semifinal matchup being TM versus Tsitsipas. And then I have the second semifinal matchup being Djokovic versus Zverev. Now, I'm going to talk about my winners of each. I think in the TM versus Tsitsipas semifinal, which was last year's original timeline's final, I think it plays out a similar way. Tsitsipas just seems to be on a roll in these indoor hard courts. He just came off making, in my timeline, came off making the final of Paris. And I think he continues that role here. I think he beats TM. Zverev versus Djokovic. Djokovic just had a long year, I think. In the original timeline, he didn't even make it to the semifinals. But I think he makes it here, and I think Zverev is just playing too well at this point, and he makes it to the final. So my final ends up being Zverev versus Tsitsipas, so TM is not in the final, Zverev is in the final in my time.
Yeah, very, very. I think that's also a fair results given the way your rankings ended up. For me, I have in the semis, I have Djokovic versus Stefanos, and then I have Medvedev versus Zverev. Now, again, I agree with you. I think all of the big 3 really didn't do well in this tournament because I think as they're getting older, they're getting more tired, they're more prone to kind of, turn it down near the end of the year. Again, I want to apologize for all the Fed fans who are probably yelling at me for saying Federer is the god of the World Tour Finals, master of indoor tournaments. Why didn't he go further than round robin? He limped into the semis and then he lost in straight sets. In my timeline, I have Djokovic kind of, squeezes out into the semis, but then he loses to Stefanos. So I have Stefanos defeating Djokovic. And again, he's on a roll. Even in my timeline, I have him making the semifinals of Paris and losing to Djokovic. So still a very good hardcourt result. I have him beating him here, though, because, both in the original timeline, this is kind of where he turns it on. So I really think that he takes it. And then in Medvedev versus Zverev, I have actually Zverev beating Medvedev here because Medvedev originally the World Tour Finals didn't do very well here. So I think Zverev really, takes this decently, either in tight 2 or 3 sets where he dominates in the 3rd set. And I have a finals matchup. Sorry.
So doesn't he have the same finals matchup then?
Well, I have Stefanos versus Zverev.
Yeah, so I also have Stefanos versus Zverev.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even realize that. Yeah, of course. That's very interesting. Who do you have winning this?
Okay, yeah. So Me, I think that we've had Zverev have a very up and down year, and I think that's going to be the story of this tournament. I think he has a really good tournament, and then he double faults like 12 times in this finals matchup. And I think Zverev takes it in straight sets. Honestly, I mean not, and I think Stefanos takes it in straight sets just because he's shown to be really consistent this year, and he's very young, so he doesn't have the mileage on him that the big three does. So I think he just carries the level through, and I don't think Zverev rises to the occasion on this tournament. So I have Stefanos in straight sets.
I actually agree with you here as well. I think it's also a pretty easy win for Stefanos here, and he wins in straight sets. And that kind of repeats what happened in the real timeline where Stefanos won, was the champion. I think, again, with the round robin format, I think what's interesting about this format is that it's less prone to, seed changes making a big difference because everyone has to play everyone in their group before you get to single elimination, which is why I think in this format there wasn't as much variability or volatility to who ends up winning. So I think it makes sense that we have Stefanos winning this. And in terms of our final rankings, for me, I have, at the end of the day, end of 2019, the end of the year, world number one, I said this painfully, Roger Federer ends up being world number one with over 10,000 points. I have Nadal at number two. I know, indeed. I have Nadal at a little under 9,000, Djokovic at 8,500-ish, Stefanos at 4, DM at 5, Medvedev at 7 or at 6, Zverev at 7, and Berrettini at 8. And then I think for your rankings, I think yours ends up being almost similar to mine.
I think it's very similar. I think the couple differences is that you had a roughly 2,000 point difference between Federer and Nadal, world number 1 and 2. Mine ends up being much closer, about only a 400 ranking points difference. But our top three are Federer, Nadal, Djokovic in that order. I have TM actually being slightly above Tsitsipas. So TM 4 seed and Tsitsipas is the 5th seed. You have it the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Medvedev also being the 6th seed with roughly the same number of ranking points. Somehow, even though I guess how it equalized is that you ended up you had Medvedev having a much better ATP finals than I did. So
yeah,
I don't think Medvedev did he win I think he won one match in my time. Anyways,
yeah, I had him getting out at least, yeah.
And then Zverev and then Berrettini. So in our 2 ATP finals, the difference seems to be, or our end of year rankings, I guess our difference seems to be between TM and Tsitsipas. But
yeah.
I guess the difference between those rankings and then the end of year rankings in our actual timeline is crazy because
God, I don't even want to look at the real rankings. I already know, but
yeah, I mean, I'll literally I'll pull it up, but basically we had all ending up as world number 1 because of Djokovic's lack of performance in the ATP finals and Djokovic and then Federer. But now we have Federer taking that number 1 spot and then followed by Nadal and then Djokovic. And then TM ends up still taking that number 4 seed because of Medvedev not performing as well at the end of year finals. But then we have Tsitsipas slightly overperforming in our timeline. And then the rest seems to more or less follow as how it actually happens.
So do you have the so the actual rankings were Djokovic, Federer, Nadal then, right?
Yeah, so the actual rankings are Nadal 1.
Oh, sorry, I'm so stupid. I'm sorry.
And Federer. Nadal ended up year number 1.
Yeah, he was, and because this was a great year for Nadal. I'm stupid. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, you're good.
Sorry, these timelines have mixed me up now. But I just want to contextualize. In my timeline, which I think the major difference is that I have Federer beating Nadal in the U.S. Open final rather than losing, which I think is a very I think it's a divergent point, but it's hard to predict how that would have gone. I have Federer with 22 Grand Slams, Nadal with 18, and Djokovic with 15 at the end of the year. Just think about that for 1 second.
15.
Federer,
because he doesn't take
Wimbledon. So Djokovic ends up with 15 slams. And even if we're not going to preview next year or this current year, but let's pretend Djokovic wins this year. The difference between 22, 18, and 16 is so much different than 2019 and 17. That one Wimbledon match really makes such a difference because also Federer would have held on to world number one. Federer currently, his streak of being world number one for the longest amount, total weeks, Djokovic is challenging that amount right now. And actually, I think because of this coronavirus situation, he'll probably eclipse it, which, again, I'm going to say on the record, I think that's kind of a fake record. If he gets all those weeks accumulated,
Excuses are coming out now. All
if
the
he if he gets these weeks for this BS situation, I'm not counting that in the rankings.
I think he's getting rankings for these weeks. If he does, I'll personally not count it as well.
All right, I think, well, then I will be happy with that. But, and in, just saying this one match makes such a difference. And then in Rahul's timeline, how do your slams end up looking?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess our main difference is that Federer doesn't get that slam and Nadal gets a slam. So, and instead of there being only a one slam difference between Federer and Nadal, there ends up being a two slam difference, which, is big because, getting one slam every year for the big three, imaginable. Two slams is much, much more difficult. And they can do it, but, you have to remember, until this point, right? Until before 2019, I think the closest gap between Federer and anyone else, pretty much Nadal, had ever been was 3 Grand Slams, right? So you still have that gap of 3 Grand Slams in your timeline. I have it cut down to slightly 2, right? But
it's 4 in mine. It's 4 in mine.
Oh yeah, it's 4, right? Which is
Huge.
more or less how it's been, and it's significant because injuries happen and things can change. But with there only being the difference between 1 and then 2 or 4 slams, insane. I think that's the big takeaway from this. And then I think another takeaway is that we can also say that that could have cascaded into how 2020, early parts of 2020 played out as well. Because
yeah, I mean, I think we'll stop at 2019 because there's been very little 2020. But again, it's just crazy to think how the GOAT conversation, which is still ongoing, and we previewed that in our last podcast, but obviously that was if we freezed it at the current time, and obviously that's not actually happening. It could be really interesting to see how that one match near the twilight of Federer's career, and everyone, the big three are getting very old, that could make the difference between who ends up being the greatest of all time in terms of who ends up with the most slams. Yeah. Because if Federer gets eclipsed, everyone will talk about this match, and especially based on what we've shown, it could have made the difference between him having the most slams and maybe ending up even with the third most slams when this is all said and done.
It's funny because Djokovic might end up deciding who's the GOAT, and it's not even himself. He's deciding, okay, I want to beat Nadal today, or no, I want to beat Federer today. Djokovic just seems to be playing that decider role, and I don't know, man. It's kind of a crazy one to see, especially I don't know.
Well, it's because
I didn't believe until I figured out how this played out.
Well, I just think it's really interesting because when Nadal was finally breaking through, and Nadal was clearly at the end of 2010. I mean, I'll admit, Nadal at the end of 2010 was insane. I mean, he did great that year. And 2011, that was Nadal's time. Nadal went to so many finals that year. I mean, it goes the other way. Dude, it goes the other way too. Goes the other way because Nadal made all those finals. He made literally, I think, so many finals that year, and only Djokovic beat him. So it's funny, you say that, because Djokovic has actually reduced Nadal's claim to the GOAT in certain aspects as well, with the number of slams and tournaments that Djokovic has stolen from Nadal. So it's really hard to say who Djokovic has ended up favoring more in deciding this, but maybe Djokovic.
No, sorry, I was gonna say this could also go to why that Djokovic, we can both say that we really appreciate his game and he brings something different to the game, right? But then you watch these matches, I was watching that Wimbledon match in London, right? It's technically not either of their home courts, right? But I'm watching it and I couldn't find a Djokovic match in that final. The points that Djokovic was winning in that 5th set of that Wimbledon were just not to be seen. And maybe that's because, right, we see in all these matches, whether it's in 2011 or especially 2019 now, Djokovic playing spoiler, either Nadal or Federer, right? And so Federer fans hate him, Nadal fans don't like him. Like, and what's left for Djokovic? He's just winning these slams, but nothing is left for him.
You can't get any love from the tennis public.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but I think he could end up. I mean, we'll end the video very shortly, but just that, kind of last conversation. I mean, I think Djokovic he's at 17 slams now, Federer at 20, Nadal at 19. What do you think of Djokovic maybe sneaking up to the top of this conversation?
I don't like it at all. But I mean, look, if you especially in our timeline now, you can't, any tournament Djokovic is in, aside from maybe the French Open, you would have to say he's the favorite, right? Even in Wimbledon right now, especially Federer could have rewritten his history in that 2019 Wimbledon. The past 3 Wimbledon finals he's played against Djokovic, right? Federer's won all these Wimbledons, but Djokovic seems to always be that one thorn on his side at his favorite tournament. And even then, Djokovic has also been the thorn on Nadal's side a couple times at the French Open. So it's safe to say Djokovic is kind of slowly making his case. And in our alternate timelines, just by Federer beating him, he's not even in the conversation.
Yeah, so, well, this has been terrible, and I never want to think about this conversation ever again. So with that, I'm gonna sign off.
Great. With that great note, I think it's a good time to sign off and wish everyone a happy quarantine.
Stay safe, quarantinos.